Roll call.
Braddock. Here. Buck.
Here.
Detmer. Here. McSweeney.
Here.
Meridian.
Here.
Newman.
Here.
Paul.
Here.
Robson.
Here.
Roma.
Here.
Renew. 52-19-07-200-012. So, John, would you like to start?
Members of the commission, there's a memo that was prepared for tonight's meeting. It was dated August 30th, 2023, and it's got the technical site plan review that's required under the PUD ordinance for the project. As you're well aware, the subject site is just over 11 acres. It is currently zoned I2. It's subject for its second PUD reading to rezone it to PUD. And the project contains 204 apartment units, various sizes, various bedroom sizes, in a 5,000 square foot proposed commercial building that would be on the corner. The site plan was reviewed subject to section 1716, which is the standards for review. I will say, without going through each one of the standards, that overall the site plan submission was fairly complete and addressed many of the issues that had been discussed in several pre-development meetings with the city department staff. One of the things that you will note in your packet is that we are now starting a formal site plan department review process where each of the departments, in advance of the planning commission meeting, get a form along with the site plan. And then they provide us their detailed comments, which I include in the packet. So you can see where all of the various departments weigh in on their various reviews and their concerns. The project overall, some of the outstanding issues or issues that need to be discussed, I'm sure, are going to be because this is a brownfield and what those implications are for the project, as well as because it's a brownfield and it's potentially a contaminated site, what the implications are going to be for the stormwater system, which has been reviewed by Eagle preliminarily. And there's a copy of their letter that's attached to the review. As part of my review, I had listed a total of 10 different conditions. And those included the need for an additional fire hydrant on the southeast corner of the proposed commercial lot. Revising the light fixtures, that would be the poles, the brackets, the luminaires, and the wall packs to black color instead of white. They need to address the July 28th, 2023 Eagle letter and their requirements. We did a specific site plan or a landscaping plan review that was done by Tim Knudsen, who's a professional landscape architect. His memo is attached. There's just a couple of items that need to be clarified. We're recommending that there be a double filter fence installed along the Bear River. That would be Eagle S51 soil erosion and sedimentation control strategy, primarily just to ensure that construction sediments are caught before they get to the Bear. Typically what we found with the recent heavy rain events, that a single filter fabric fence isn't sometimes enough to catch all of the sedimentation. Because the construction is going to be fairly close to the river, we wanted to have a line of 2 filter fences. We're recommending the removal of 6 parking spaces that are adjacent to 2 curb cuts in order to allow people that are turning in and people that may be backing out to reduce the conflict between that. The reduction of the 6 parking spaces, still, they meet their parking required under the ordinance. We're recommending that during and after construction, that they utilize construction catch basin filters. That's Eagle S58 strategy. The snow removal areas were identified on the landscaping plan. We're recommending that they also be identified on the site and dimensional plan. And further, we're recommending that the snow removal storage areas not be along the river, but they be in a maybe surplus parking area that would be subject to snow melt. So the snow melt would get into the closed storm system and get some level of treatment before it gets into the Bear River. We're recommending the installation of heavy duty concrete pads in front of the dumpsters and compactors. And prior to issuance of a zoning permit, the developer will be providing 2 easements. One is for a 10-foot shared pathway along Standish Avenue. The other one is a easement to the south portion of the property that is adjacent to Riverside Park. That could be used potentially in the future as part of the extension of the Bear River Recreation Area and a pedestrian bridge to allow residents in that neighborhood to cross the river to get into the park without having to use the road. So those are the 10 conditions based on the review of the technical site plan. So with that, I will turn that over to the Planning Commission. But my last comment is that I did prepare in advance my technical review to the consultant, so they had an opportunity to review these and respond accordingly. And according to Mr. Seeger, the project engineer, they are in agreement with the conditions that have been specified in the technical review. Is that correct, Wayne? So that's the detail on the review. And if the Planning Commission has any particular questions for me, I'm open at this time.
John, what are these last 2 conditions? There's a condition sheet that was here when we arrived.
Based on some conversations with the chair, there were 2 other conditions that I did brief the consultant on. One was removing the existing sidewalk along Standish. That does not appear in the site plan, but it does appear in the rendering illustration that you're going to see tonight. So we clarified that is going to be coming out. And then the Planning Commission had wanted material boards to show the materials and the colors. And those weren't in the submission, but my understanding is that Wayne has brought those tonight to share with the Planning Commission. So even though we added 2 additional conditions, those have all been resolved as well.
Okay, would the applicant like to, and interest, name and how you're connected?
Good evening, everyone. Doug Mansfield. I'm president of Mansfield Land Use Consultants, located at 830 Cottage View Drive, Suite 201, Traverse City, Michigan. Here tonight on behalf of Great Lakes Capital with their proposed Maple Block Flats, which of course is on Standish Avenue in the land of the Maple Block Company. Been here several times. It's quite a process. So I kind of want to identify our understanding is we're here for site plan approval, and then that goes to the final PUD rezoning later this month. And we do have some critical dates. I'm just going to lay out for you. We're trying to hit several $1 million worth of mixed middle income and brownfield credits that have to be approved by September 30th. So we brought the whole team here tonight. We're really hoping to work with you to resolve any conflicts that you see. So I'm very happy to see the full participation. Mr. Iconagelli did a fabulous layout for you. And the project hasn't changed tremendously from when we first started on the project, shifted here and there to meet all the different criteria. But it is our understanding at this point that we have fulfilled the site plan review. We have met with all the agencies and preliminarily everything looks good. So it's our full intent to comply with all the city ordinances, all the state and county criteria to see this through. And that's not only impressed, it's not just the developer you're dealing with, because there are federal and state dollars and city dollars involved in this project. There is sincere scrutiny through the entire process for those monies to change hands, scrutiny that you'd never see in just a private development. So we wanted to lay that out. With me tonight, I've got representatives of the developers. We have Mac here on the brownfield issues, Wayne, of course, on engineering issues. We have the contractor here tonight. So again, if we have any questions, I'll kind of facilitate those, but just to go over briefly, on the 11 acres, we are proposing 4 3-story buildings with 24 apartments each, and then 3 3-story buildings with 36 apartments in each building, and then the commercial. We do meet the parking requirements, and as I understand it, we meet all the other setback issues and the other criteria set forth in the ordinance. So I won't belabor that discussion, okay? I think John always does a great review, and it's really appreciated. And again, the conditions laid out thus far, we're agreeing to making those changes. We didn't want to confuse the issue by doing a whole other set of plans. They're fairly simple issues. But we are in full intent willing to meet those. At this time, I will ask that Wayne uncover a fantastic plastic bag full of shingles and siding, and you can feel those and touch them. Some are brochures, some are actually the materials, and this is not any small development. This is real materials. This is high-end product here, long-lasting and grounded on.
All right.
So you should have a sample of the siding type, the shingles, the ledge stone we're using,
All right.
that will make up the fabric of the
So-
apartment.
Maybe you can get to the page of what you're actually using. So this is the roofing.
And Lisa, at this time, could we go to some renderings with some photorealistic renderings done, incorporating the design into the landscape?
Do you want the ones from this afternoon?
Yes, please. So we have a recent drone flight done of the site, incorporated the plan with the full CAD drawings, all gone vertical. Now you can start to see the shade, the shadow in a realistic form, the scale of development against the adjacent uses and the landscape, and get a clearer picture. But we think we've arrived at a fairly efficient yet pleasing, aesthetically characteristic of the area, and we place on different roof lines and pitches.
So these are actual product then, what we're,
This is the actual product. This is about as photorealistic to what we're proposing as possible.
I'm not seeing the exact thing, but would this be the color?
It's
You'll put in-
actually the browner color.
Well,
Yeah.
this one,
Mhm.
maybe the. The material that she's holding is
that's.
the manufacturer and the context of the material, I guess, if you will, that stone. My apologies if they don't maybe exact with the brochure, exactly match with the brochure.
Yeah, no, it's different. Maybe this one's closer. But it's not it isn't the same. All right, but this is the manufacturer, and then you're doing. The almond or the mist gray? For the color, for this part of it.
It's the darker taupe tone at the top. On the right,
This one?
yeah,
Oh, all right.
that's on the batten, and then the lighter color is the horizontal.
So,
So when you mean lighter color,
right here.
Um,
in this area.
You have,
Oh, okay.
And then dark.
So is that a mist gray
Right.
or wheat? Okay, so when you look at this, it's LP walnut and LP sand. If you could pass them, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I think they're illustrating that it's those are the products they're using. So if you have any opinion, you can share it.
With that being said, I'm going to turn over the mic real briefly to Mac McClellan and talk a little bit about the brownfield. We know that's an important issue to all of us and that we think it needs extra time. So, Mac.
Thanks, Doug. I rarely speak briefly, but I'll try and do that. I'm Matt McClellan, the Brownfield Consultant on the project, work closely with the environmental consultant, Al Amavi, as well as all the development team. My primary purpose is managing and organizing and acquiring all the incentives for the project. And there are a whole bunch of them for this project. The only thing I just wanted to comment on is it is a brownfield site. It does have impacts on that site that all have to be addressed. And I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the scheme, the regulatory process that happens when you acquire property. You go through a process to get exemption from liability for those past activities. By sampling that property, you file a baseline environmental assessment, and you're exempt from the liability if you do all of that work within 45 days of acquisition. So you're exempt from that contamination. You didn't cause that contamination. You're exempt from that liability. You still have obligations, however, due care obligations, not to make it any worse and not to expose people to that. And so in projects where you have that contamination, there's a process where you have to evaluate all of the pathways. You have to do an analysis of all the due care pathways of how that contamination may reach people, might expose people, as well as any of the other activities that you don't want to exacerbate that contamination and make it any worse. So there's a process that each owner has to do through a compliance analysis, often called the due care plan, that is done. And then also have to kind of document that you took those due care measures. That's the kind of standard regulatory scheme. In this particular case, in this particular project, we'll have a much higher standard of evaluation within that. In those circumstances, Eagle can knock on the door and say, show us your due care plan and show us your documentation of due care compliance, and then you have to show it to them. But that's kind of after the fact, and if there's a regulatory issue. In this particular case, because of the incentives involved, because of the Eagle Brownfield grant alone, we received, fortunately, $1 million Eagle Brownfield grant and $1 million Eagle loan. All of those steps to anything of those expenditures are all evaluated by Eagle each time when that is done. Any soil evaluation, any kind of sampling that's done, any of those pieces have that scrutiny. Wouldn't happen in a normal project, another project, but all of that scrutiny occurs for this project. So there's a whole lot of work that's been done directly with Eagle, and it's a public process throughout that time where there's going to be looked at all of that evaluation, a whole lot of discussion about that. That grant actually goes to the city, so the city does play a role within managing that grant as well. The other part that probably is most important is the MSHA grant for the missing middle requires specific approval of what's now called a response activity plan or due care plan that says, what are you going to do to make certain that the public is protected, that human health is protected, that there's no exposure to this, and you're not making that contamination any worse. So Eagle actually has to approve that plan, that kind of additional activity that's there. In addition, after the project is done, we'll have to document all of those activities that were taken to show that that actually happened with the documentation of due care compliance that actually has to be approved again by Eagle. So there's a whole process that happens here that's over and above because of those incentives. It's really over and above to manage all of the issues on the site. The primary concerns are soil and soil management, any of the vapors that might be in soil and could come up. And right now we have, and I will say, this is my 80th brownfield project, and I think I worked on about 300 sites. There's probably more evaluation of this site at this particular point in time than most of the other projects that I've worked on. So we have quite a bit of data that's available. About the only thing that we have left to do is one with soil gas sampling and then determining what might happen in terms of some of that soil removal. I will say that a condition of the Eagle grant was also to remove quite a bit of soil that may be over and above what our minimum due care obligations. And so through that grant, we're able to do even more in removing some of that source material. So I think we've kind of elevated that because of those incentives, because of those activities that are required in an ongoing process for that for evaluation. I think we'll meet a much higher standard for that due care obligation than most projects. And I'm happy to go into painful detail about any of those questions, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
What, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Why did this site, do you feel that this site had so much more scrutiny than any of the other ones that you've worked on?
We've just done more work in evaluating what the conditions are and what the concerns are. You know, when you buy a piece of property, you do a phase 1 environmental site assessment, identify the recognized environmental conditions, and you punch a couple holes to see if anything released around those. We've done even more to try and determine the extent of that contamination, when normally that would be done after the project is moving along and going and dealing with those. So there's been more investigation that's been done and so scrutiny. In addition, we had to justify to Eagle that this was a site that they wanted to participate in and fund. So we had to elevate that level of investigation a little bit more. And I think that was an assistance in getting the $1 million. We also got a blight elimination grant fund through the County Land Bank Authority to take down the building. And I've said to other folks before, this is one of this kind of has the whole gambit of problems in a site. You've got a big old building with a bunch of asbestos to take down, and shallow soils that are unstable that may require some special foundations and contaminated soil. So it's kind of hits all those brownfield checklists that before you even start building, that's all those diseconomies, all those things that really don't add value to the project, but they have to deal with because it's such a great site, because it's such a great opportunity. That's the reason that it's moving forward. So.
Okay. Rick?
Is this the right time to address the mitigation and the containment type strategies that are you proposing? I mean, has your firm proposed that, or are there other consultants and other planners that are putting together a plan for mitigation and containment?
Yeah, I can address that. The two primary issues, to deal with is the soil contamination. There's a couple of spots in each, constituent, or each contaminant has a criteria for what pathway is of concern. Drinking water is one pathway because it's in a municipal water supply. That really isn't a concern in this particular case. There are some sites of direct contact where that exceed that, and so there has to be protective measures. They have to be, somewhere around 2 feet of soil above that, or that material removed. So then that's likely the scenario. We only found one small location of that direct contact, so that'll be removed. Another is groundwater surface water interface, which is kind of an interesting thing, is the potential. And these are all screening criteria. We don't know if it's going to be the generic screening criteria across the state. And so there's a whole bunch of factors as to whether that will be of concern. But that will be, part of the soil removal process. Again, that will be evaluated by Eagle in terms of its effectiveness. The other main concern are the exposure pathway, and it's really heightened the interest because it is a viable exposure pathway. Over a serious one, I'm saying, is the potential for vapors to come into a building, and because people are living in the building and staying in the building, that they can be exposed to that over a period of time. And so, without that evaluation, without going through that process, we want to look carefully at those issues. Either removing that soil that might exceed those vapor exceedances, or putting in a vapor mitigation system, which is like a radon system, a series of pipes to draw those vapors away from the building and exhaust them away, as well as a barrier to prevent that kind of a belt and suspenders approach. So that's what we're evaluating right now. We had one round of soil gas. Again, these are screening criteria. We don't know exactly whether it's coming up or not. We had one round where we got in a couple of locations, a small little bit of soil gas vapor. We're going to do another round as part of the Eagle grant. So evaluating those pieces as well. If there is vapor necessary, again, we've got to go through a long process for the design and effectiveness and operation and maintenance for those systems. Is that too long or too short of an answer there?
Todd?
Well, I have a few questions. We started tonight with a statement that there's potential contamination at this site. And you would agree with what was shown to us at some point. There's documented significant contamination at multiple sites. I mean, that's what we were given. Correct. So I wanted to clarify that. Initially, at the preliminary PUD meeting in February, there was a very minimal discussion about would this be a brownfield site or not. The submission from the developer was there might be no contamination. We might just have to level ground and not worry about it. There might be contamination, in which case we might have to, in the area we have to fill, we might have to put in some clean topsoil. So that was where we started. It was also said that the stormwater would be fully contained on site at that meeting. So that was in February preliminary PUD approval. When we met on June 13th, that was for that meeting where we're going to do potentially final PUD approval. And that's where we had more information. The stormwater plan had changed. I asked at the meeting if there was documented contamination. That's where we got this. So it's been a little slow coming to us, some of the information. We're pretty sensitive, I think, a lot of residents of Petoskey and familiar with contamination issues. I was sitting there when we were doing remediation of the Bay Harbor site, which was built with a plan. And then the plan failed and there was big problems and a lot of money involved in finger pointing and eventually got to a solution. So that's why, as you are aware, we're very sensitive to these things. We've got a letter from Eagle, for this meeting. There was some meeting with them and it says the action is that you will be required to have a permit or multiple permits to go ahead with this. It says that they haven't, you just had a pre-application meeting and they can't guarantee you they're going to even give you a permit to go ahead. That I assume legally they have to say that. I don't know what their intent is, but that's what they said. And they said that there are potentially some of the things they're going to look at involve design changes to the site. Specifically, one was with the stormwater issue. Would it go into the river or would it be diverted to some wetland? I don't exactly know the full extent of that. But so for us, for me personally, at least as a planning commissioner, there's a lot of things that might happen and might change that affect potentially the site itself. And again, I'm thinking back to a little bit Bay Harbor. I'm thinking back to what we should do to be responsible. How much of this is hands off? We just say, fine, someone else is going to deal and make some decisions about what's necessary. And you don't have to tell us, just tell us when you're done. Or do we or city council, who has to know in the city? And that's what I'm a little troubled with. Maybe we should be a little more involved in this and knowing what's going on.
I think one part about that is that the city has an ongoing role with the Eagle Grant, which will be supervising all of the environmental activities on the site. So there will be an active role for the city in that they're the grantee for that. So all the plans, all the activities have to come through that piece as well. So, and I think the way that I view this is, and whether I've looked at other sites as well, is that, there's a site plan that's considered here today. That there are a couple of changes. I think that we feel comfortable in the way that the stormwater is designed at this point in time. We feel comfortable with a soil management plan, which should be remove some soil and take that out. But as we go on and do some additional evaluation, have the input with the permit agencies, have all of those other kinds of activities. If that comes back and affects the site plan that you hopefully will approve tonight, then we'll come back for either a minor amendment or a major amendment in that case. My sense is at this point in time that those would be fairly small changes. The soil, no matter what we review, will have to come back to grade and we'll come to those grading plans that you do. And the site will look the same no matter what happens underneath. And the stormwater, system may have a small adjustment where it might pre-discharge into a swale or wetlands. And then that might be something to come back if that's sort of the regulatory requirement. But my sense is that we have done a pretty good job of, at this point in time with the site plan approval process, laid out the site. But those two items will not, in my opinion, significantly impact that site plan. But if they do, there's a process where we have to come back to you and make those either minor or major adjustments.
One other maybe comment you could make, you must be aware that yesterday, later in the day, we received a letter from the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council with some concerns. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, we've had some conversations with Tip of the Mitt and as well, that is what we're kind of working through. And one of the reasons that I stated that is there's going to be an open public process that Tip of the Mitt can participate in. All of those documents that we're going to be submitting with respect to that is all public information. They can provide comments and evaluate that through the design process, through all of those kind of pieces. So there's an opportunity for input into that specific regulatory role at Eagle, and as well, the approval of the response activity plan and documentation of due care requirements. So there's ways in which that, that evaluation or outside evaluation can occur. So we share those concerns. I mean, we not only have kind of a moral obligation, but a legal obligation to make sure that we comply with due care obligations, not exposing anyone or not making the contamination any worse. And we'll have lots of conversations with our friends at Eagle about all of that. But again, it's all public, open, and we've shared all the documents that we have right now with Tip of the Net, and we'll continue to work with them. I want to say just maybe one thing on the kind of maybe the early meeting, and I don't know the timing of all of that, but there might not have been much investigation or the level of investigation that we had at the time in February when that was done. We found that that came about the issue. And I would characterize the site as widespread contamination, but not significant. It's not the same as the PMC Superfund site, the Bay Harbor CKD site, where there's significant contamination as public health. This is run of the mill isn't quite the right term, but it's a pretty standard level of contamination on the site. It just happens to be widespread because of the fill material on the site, in that situation. So just wanted to state that in terms of the timing and whether it is. And I'll just say one of the things about the stormwater and why that ended up changing is that, and why we ended up with the system there is that one of the concerns is if you have contaminated soil, you can't collect stormwater, put it in an infiltration basin, and then flush it in through the soil, through the contaminated soil and into contaminated groundwater. That exacerbates that contamination. So that's the primary reason that it's more of a collection, treatment, and discharge system being proposed.
Charlie?
A couple of questions. When was the phase 1 and phase 2 testing conducted?
Ooh, I'm not a chronological thinker. I can try and find that out before the end of the meeting. I'll look that up.
Well, I presume that this was developed from the phase 1, phase 2, and this is dated in March. So we also received some information about stormwater calculations for the basic system back in January, which predated this particular phase 1, phase 2. Has the stormwater calculations been updated since then to the most recent site plan using the information that you received from the phase 1 and phase 2?
Yeah, I would have to turn over the calculations to Wayne on the design of the stormwater system and kind of where that is, but we've been working closely together in terms of the relationship of stormwater to that.
And I understand that the city and Eagle will have a lot to say about that system, and we're neophytes with regard to that. But just want to make sure that the system that you're talking about is going to take care of not only a 50-year, but potentially a large snow melt on the parking lots, and also not involve any contamination. So be interested in hearing more about that at some point in time, whether it's from you or someone else. We specifically asked in the last meeting, I think it was, for more information regarding the aqua swirl or whatever it's called, and its capacity to handle what the 2 locations that you're going to use it for stormwater mitigation. So any more information that we can have on that to satisfy us that it is adequately designed would be very useful.
Do you want that addressed at this point in time?
Yeah.
Yeah, Wayne Seeger with Mansfield Land Use Consultants. So the stormwater, yes, there was originally calculations done based on the city ordinance for the stormwater retention base into the ground. The stormwater calculations don't change. The rain is still the rain, and what's going to fall from the sky is still going to be the same. The ability for the units to handle that from a volume standpoint, that's where we're going to make sure that happens. I mean, they size those accordingly. We're still looking at some different manufacturers. We do want to have the right unit for this project. And that will be hand in hand with some of the Eagle permitting process to make sure that we have those right units. I can address the wetland comments that they had indicated on the letter. That is where there's some wetlands on the property. So you have the river that goes through and then the banks, and then there's on the south side of the property, and then kind of in the middle, there's some wetland areas that are essentially, just above the water level. And then the bank goes up, and then that's the hard line. We have wetland scientists out there. And so the hard elevation, if you will, along the Bear River is the wetland line. So any of those areas that extend out old historic riverfront would be the wetlands. Bill is asking that potentially we may direct some of our discharge through those wetlands, which then it becomes back to are there contaminants in those wetlands? I don't think there are on the south side of the property. And we have to validate that, but that's where we could easily add a little bit of wetland flow to that discharge point. So it's really the whole package together. We're managing stormwater, the water that comes from the sky, as a closed system to go through a mechanical cleaning device. And whether it ends at the cleaning device, the cleaning stormwater unit, back to the river, whether it goes through the wetlands, that'll be just, very similar to what we're seeing now. The changes to the plan is going to be a pipe is going to actually just turn a couple degrees the other way. And we will manage the stormwater that's, as the volumes indicate in the ordinance as they are now.
If you look at the overall plan for the development, and I believe that the letter from Tip of the Mitt speculated that 60% of the entire acreage will be covered with a new development, whether it's asphalt or buildings. But that leaves us with 40% that isn't. Is the plan in those 40%, as the plan currently, understanding the plan will change, it's in flux depending on the testing and the requirements that these various permits have. But is the plan to not only do soil removal from those areas, and mitigation, but also to put in some kind of shielding in those areas to prevent the groundwater from continuing to flow through to the contaminated areas? Sorry to keep you going back and forth.
Yeah, sorry. I need the electronics. Yeah, and that's part of the evaluation process as well with Eagle. Typically, in those changes, it's currently open area, in those places. But we'll evaluate the levels of contamination. We haven't. Let's see, I've got a number here. We've taken 48 soil borings, across that site. So quite an extensive area. We haven't hit everywhere. So we're going to look at those areas, and we focused our issues on the buildings themselves, where the activity is going to happen. We'll also be evaluating those other areas to determine if there's a concern or an issue in those sites and the potential for any exacerbation on those sites.
Thank you. I have some questions for the planner as well, but I don't know if now is the appropriate time to do that.
Why don't we let them finish presenting and
Okay.
then we'll address the general questions.
A great discussion so far, and thank you very much for all your attention. At the end of this, I'll let this go back to the commission. I want to say that Great Lakes Capital understand this is not their first time dealing with this. I know from experience they're dealing with two of the toughest sites left in Traverse City on the main corridor. That have everything from urban fill to benzenes flowing to the Bourbon River, and they have done everything they're required to do, all the reporting and all the public and private partnerships, and carried that through the entire development successfully to really recreate the west side of Traverse City, West Front Street. And so far, the path they're going down is that exact same success story. So you got a good partner here. We have a good project that's resolving a big issue in our community. And at this time, I've heard the discussions about this change and that change. From my work, which is planning and architecture and site planning and engineering, whether this shifts that way, or they find a certain level of dirt here, the site plan as you see it and as it reacts to your ordinance and your policies, it should not change. Okay. I don't see and have not experienced in my work in brownfields that issue. Usually it's an underground issue. It's whether to remove soil, cover soil, do these kind of things or treat the stormwater, but I do not see a site plan change in any of the discussions. But at this time, I'll turn it back over, and again, we're a resource for you, and feel free to ask. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, Charlie, want to start with your questions?
I just wanted to ask the planner a general question about the lane of the planning commission in this process. As I look at your recommendations and the issues that are satisfied in accordance with the ordinance, there's not a lot of development of the stormwater and potentially contamination containment, if you will, in the ordinance specifically that the planning commission is ordained to look at. And yet we want to be as effective as possible in making our recommendation. So could you describe for us a little bit more the latitude that we as the planning commission should embrace as far as further recommendations in a motion?
That's a great question, Commissioner. I think you're right. The current ordinance and most zoning ordinances do not deal with contamination because that is usually a situation that's done through the brownfield process and through the oversight of Eagle. So many communities basically recognize that the property is a brownfield, but that they also rely on Eagle to provide recommendations in terms of how the property is going to be developed and what its compliance is going to be. The strategies that have been taken place on this project, I think, are appropriate. First, because of the closed system. The city engineers have looked at the applicant's calculations, and in their review, they said based on the preliminary plans and the basis of design, the on-site storm system is in concept, is approved. But they're also falling back on that there may be some modifications that are requested by Eagle. Now, where the planning commission may end up seeing this again, because these projects are somewhat fluid, depending on when they start scraping off the property and then they do further testing, is that there's three triggers in the PUD ordinance. The first one is a minor amendment, which is administrative. The second one is a major amendment, which is administrative plus planning commission. And there's a third a major amendment, which is legislative, which requires then the approval to go back to the city council, depending on the degree of change on the site. So as we go through the process, and I've been through brownfield projects before, that there may be some tweaking of the site plan based on what's found in the field at the time that the project is under construction and what the final permits are required by Eagle. But there may be either a minor amendment or a major amendment back to the PC. But that's how the planning commission can monitor the scope of the project as it goes through the construction process.
Thank you. We have an extraordinarily strong city staff, and in particular the Public Works Department. And I appreciate your mentioning the review of the department with regard to stormwater. Specifically, what they said was stormwater design and on-site management will be dictated by Eagle. Recommendations and requirements for managing contaminants, and the developers do care obligations for the property and to the public. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I'm sure there's some kind of legalese behind the words do care obligations. But I guess our Public Works Department then will be working closely with Eagle on a day-by-day basis to evaluate the recommendations of Eagle and oversee the actual construction and remediation. Is that?
Well, my understanding is that once a permit is issued by Eagle, the city obviously is a recipient of that permit. So the city will know all of the requirements that have been specified by Eagle relative to the scope of construction and what the strategy is going to be for the stormwater system and also for the remediation of the site. So yes, they will be involved. The other area that the engineering and Department of Public Works will be involved is because this project is going to have connections to the city water system and sanitary sewer system. They're going to be involved working on this project as it gets constructed, where those interfaces are. So yes, the city administrative staff will be involved throughout the construction of the project until it hits occupancy by the county.
Okay, another question, a slightly different take on this. The difference between the PUD and the RM1, I think it's currently zoned as RM1, correct? Is there any variation?
Industrial.
Oh, I'm sorry, industrial, pardon me. Is there any variation in the requirements in making the change to PUD with regard to remediation of the site or?
No, because you can have a brownfield in an industrial area, you can have a brownfield in a commercial area, you can have a brownfield in a residential area. And it's got to go through the same process, the same compliance, the same investigation, the same due care plan, regardless of where it's at. It doesn't have anything to do with zoning or land use type. It has everything to do with what if there's any implied contamination on the property.
So just as a follow-up to that, I think we were told at one point in time that the preference for a PUD in this particular case was because of setbacks and other unspecified flexibilities that a developer would have with a PUD versus the current zoning. Is there anything other than setbacks that necessitates the change in the zoning?
Not particularly, because it doesn't exceed the heights. They meet all the other standards. They're providing the front yard setback at 25 feet. The area that I think the PUD comes into play is in the rear, which is along the river, because there's some locations where there's a lot of open space and some areas where the project is closer to the edge of the river. So it had a little bit to do with the rear setbacks, but the densities are within the ordinance for an RM. They're not exceeding any of the densities. They're meeting all the parking requirements. They're not getting under a PUD. They don't necessarily have to meet the required parking, but they are here. Okay. And they meet all the other requirements, the landscaping requirements, the city's lighting and photometric requirements. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the site plan, they're hitting all the right buttons.
So I don't mean to be dominating here, but if we take that question and go back to the developer and say, what do you see as the need for the PUD versus the current zoning in summary?
The first iteration was a desire from the city's planning department to look at a mixed use development. And one of the things we are doing the commercial use. So you can't do commercial in the RM1. So that was the initial, and there were some integration between the commercial and residential that were setback issues and how that integrated. So that's where that arrived from. We originally had setbacks in the initial designs that did encroach more, but we've been able to solve those and take them out. But we're still looking at a mixed use development. So that's the forefront of that.
Yeah, that's a good point that Doug made. Part of the site plan review that you have to understand the outlot for the commercial. They just plop the building in there because they don't know what that building is going to be yet. Could be a restaurant, could be an office, could be a bank. We don't know yet. But when that does happen, that will come back to the planning commission for an additional site plan review.
I just wanted to say some of that arrived from the fact that we're transitioning to the north back to an extremely industrial site, which is, complicated our MSHDA approvals and things like that. So that was kind of a transitional area, and that's why we did that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, also initially you were going to exceed the height requirements.
It's all that.
Thank you. I have a couple of other questions about the site plan itself, but I don't want to sidetrack any other questions that people might have about.
Okay, I think if it's the site plan, we're gonna be going through the standards. So would we get to a point where your questions would follow the standards? Which going to ask
I
me.
just was gonna ask about the containment wall. There's a couple of sections of containment wall along the pathway by the river. I'm sorry, retainer wall. Could you please explain what's going on there? Why it's necessary, what it's supposed to achieve?
Just grade separation is all that is. So the property, we have to match at the river, we have to match at the road, and everything has to happen in between. The fire department had asked that we widen the path along the riverfront to accommodate a truck to be able to get back there so that they can go. So with the 10-foot path, and then with the building layout and it kind of falls to just a little bit of a grade.
So it doesn't have to do with flood management.
Oh, no, it's just a retaining wall, like you see a landscape in there all over the place, kind of thing, just a little bit.
The other site question that I had, and then I'll be quiet, is the separation of the parking lot from the commercial and the residential area appears to be only landscaping at this point in time.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just wondering if that's going to be adequate to separate the areas there, so. Thank you.
I think if we create walls, then we create that easy statement that your use can't be integrated to this. It's very important that that use is a compatible use to the residential. And it should be integrated, it should be part of the community there, yeah, so we're fine with it.
Okay, Ted?
Thank you.
I just had a question, if it would be appropriate now or at some point to allow a brief comments from the tip of the net, given their expertise and their involvement in this project.
Okay.
I will say I timed myself and it was under 5 minutes, but if I talk slowly and I'm rambling, just cut me off. All right. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments. My name is Anna McGlashan, and I am the local policy manager for the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. We are an environmental nonprofit based in Petoskey, Michigan, that works to protect the water resources of northern Michigan. Given the gaps in information in the current environment, given the gaps in information on the current environmental contamination of the site, as well as the potential associated health impacts, we support the City of Petoskey Planning Commission in only offering contingent approval of the site plan. The Planning Commission should also impose a deadline for the developer to present sufficient information to address the environmental and health impacts of the site plan to ensure safe and appropriate development. If the property is developed without proper remediation, the problem could be exacerbated. We have experience with many sites in our service area: the Bay Harbor KCD contamination site, the PMC groundwater Superfund site on the shores of Lower Traverse Bay and Petoskey, the Charlevoix Municipal Wellfield Superfund site, and the Wicks Manufacturing TCE plume in Antrim County, to name a few, in which actions had to be taken after the development occurred because the contamination was not completely addressed the first time. Existing groundwater sampling only took place at 2 locations, both of which are on the landward side, not the river side, of existing known hotspots of contamination. And the remediation process, design of greenbelt and open space areas, and the arrangement for the design, construction, maintenance, and operation of utility systems cannot be finalized without a complete map of the types and locations of contaminants. Finally, regarding stormwater management, the current proposed plan only addresses stormwater that falls immediately on the surface of the site, as is normal regulatory. We are asking about additional to regulatory. This water, if protected from contaminated soil by a cap, can be processed using separator technology, filtered through vegetation, and released into the environment using conventional techniques. However, the site does not only deal with precipitation that falls on the site itself. Stormwater that falls on the east side of Standish Avenue likely flows through the ground towards the Bear River on the west side of the site. This stormwater passes through contaminated soil without collection, monitoring, or management. I would like to provide some general recommendations for your consideration. 1, fully acknowledge the potential constraints of the site, even as they are unknown, and allow the planning commission to provide recommendations and oversight as this project progresses and more information about the contamination is uncovered. Use a contingent site plan approval to ensure that this project remains under the oversight of the planning commission until the contamination is fully characterized and the soil management plan is complete. 2. Petoskey as a whole should take an active role in the oversight of the project, both in terms of safeguarding its financial stake and in terms of the impact of this project on the public health, environment, and community. Form a subcommittee or designate a staff person to regularly monitor the progression of the project and regularly touch base with Eagle to ensure the project meets both baseline state requirements and the standards of Petoskey residents. Impose stricter than baseline standards on the development to ensure the safety of public health and the environment when necessary. Third, with regard to soil management, we would generally recommend removing or encapsulation of the soil for the entire site. If the soil is not encapsulated, a collection line should be installed and a monitoring program established to ensure contamination from the site does not migrate into the Bear River. Finally, coordinate with the Health Department of Northwest Michigan and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy to ensure that the site does not have an immediate impact on public health and to develop a monitoring plan to ensure that the redevelopment of the site does not create or exacerbate a public health risk. I understand that those things are in progress. This development holds the potential to offer much needed workforce housing, especially at a time when affordable housing remains out of the reach of many. The addition of more housing could attract new residents to our region, subsequently enhancing the local community and bolstering our economy. However, affordable housing should never come at the cost of potentially compromising public health and environmental integrity. We are all on the same team. It is our collective duty to establish an environment that is equitable and secure for all residents, which means that we need to know what we're looking at before finalizing plans, and that those plans must be responsive to risk. And that's my spiel. So the end point here is just that, yes, there is going to be remediation undertaken. Yes, there is going to be additional sampling that is undertaken. However, at this time, the Watershed Council is not feeling safe and secure in the existing understanding of groundwater contamination and the movement of that groundwater towards the Bear River. So, but with the understanding that additional testing will be performed, I would recommend maintaining as much oversight as possible while the project moves forward.
Does anybody have any questions? Matt?
Is it possible that the site as far as existing runoff and the flow of that water through existing contamination right now, could it be worse off right now than if this development happened with Eagle oversight? I mean, would that be an improvement to the existing situation as is?
Yes, so it is our general understanding, although I will not be bound by this. It is our general understanding that the existing development and remediation process will leave the site better off than it is currently, which means that any development under this process is going to be better than leaving it undeveloped. But that doesn't preclude the fact that there is a general responsibility to do it right.
Ted?
So you seem uncomfortable with the process before us, which has been presented as potentially, maybe I'm gonna simplify this, but don't worry about it, planning commission. There's Eagle overseeing this and city staff will work with them and just, that should be fine. Is that fine or not fine?
I do not think it is fine. And that is the general opinion of the Watershed Council. And admittedly, the experiences that are informing this position are from brownfield sites that are admittedly more contaminated than this site. Bay Harbor was a 15-year project that didn't need to be 15 years long because problems were not addressed properly the first time. And as was mentioned earlier, the contamination on this site is relatively low level, but widespread. I don't want to overstate and say we must meet the highest possible standards for remediation, or there will be a giant public health risk and there's horrible things will happen. I don't want to sound that alarm bell, but I am not currently. Lisa, do you mind pulling up the map that I sent you earlier?
Oh, sorry, it was up there and I didn't realize it switched, sorry.
Okay, so this is page 31 of the investigative report. And if you'll notice, as we, so those two blue dots are where the groundwater samples were taken. One of them is under the existing parking lot, and the other one, it doesn't look like it was in the main manufacturing part of the existing facility. And the existing soil boring samples that were taken were designed to inform the soil vapor intrusion issues for the existing buildings, right? And as you mentioned earlier, the south part of that site, where admittedly the phase 1 environmental assessment, which was determining the historical use of the site, said stuff probably wasn't dumped down there, but testing hasn't happened down there, and there's a general idea to pass stormwater through that part of the site when that part of the site hasn't been sampled. So the places where there's sort of hot spots, those red parts, are on the river side and behind the building where dumping. This is an allegation that I believe is true, but I'm not going to say it is. I believe the dumping was primarily happening behind the building, not in the parking lot. And even if it was, the parking lot is probably protecting that soil. And so if you're taking groundwater samples sort of upriver of your hot spots and you're saying it's fine, that doesn't seem like I have enough information to say that it is. And it may be okay, but I don't have the information to feel comfortable about it.
As far as Eagle's concerned, more sampling would need to happen, correct?
Right, and that is going to be a standard part of the remediation procedure. However, it is not necessarily going to require, for instance, sampling of the southern part of the parcel. That is explicitly not a required part of the remediation process. And even if you are going to pass stormwater through, it is still not and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, it is still not necessarily going to have to be tested even as this remediation process occurs. So again, it is not that there isn't a process in place, and it isn't that the people don't have everyone's best interests at heart. It is that it is my specific job to stand in front of you and say, as an advocate for water resources, I still have questions.
Sorry.
So if Eagle isn't necessarily requiring the testing in the locations that you're referring to, it's possible that the city could require that.
I believe so.
So between your partnership with Eagle and your partnership with the city, can't you affect their thought process in terms of where it needs to be tested? And how, in other words, why is it the role of the planning commission now to be the environmentalists that we depend on Eagle and the city staff to be?
So, and this is drawing on my work for New York State, where there were many times when staff who had the best interests of the population at heart were not able to take protective actions because it was not specifically enumerated in our regulations. And that was in pesticide control, not in water quality. And so understanding that it may not be a one-to-one comparison, there are restrictions on the activity of Eagle where they are held to a certain standard by the requirements that are enumerated in statutes or that are enumerated in terms of, if you meet these 5 criteria, we must process a loan. There's not necessarily discretion given to staff to say, we want to impose stricter than baseline. And it is a general principle in environmental policy that it sometimes does just fall to a local or municipal government to say, we as a city want to impose these stricter standards. The state's regulations are a floor. They are informed by toxicologists, they are informed by experts. They are not out there trying to necessarily cut corners. And I know that the staff people who are working on this have your best interests at heart, and nobody wants to do the wrong thing. I am not saying any of that. I just want to say that it does, to some extent, fall on planning commissions and city councils to impose those stricter than baseline requirements. And it's your decision if you want to do so.
And if I could, just to echo, the reminder is Bay Harbor had all the permits, the DEQ signed off. The city staff was okay. No one, these weren't bad people.
Right.
But things fell through and it was not a good, it wasn't done right.
Right.
So could that ever happen is the question.
And I'm not going to say that it is going to happen because, again, this is not Bay Harbor. This is lower levels of contamination. But I just, in reading about brownfield soil management and stormwater management, the best management techniques or best case principles were to encapsulate the soil, remove the soil, or if you're not going to remove it entirely, add a collection line and keep a close eye on it to make sure that you aren't inadvertently causing problems. And it is my understanding, based on conversations with the Petoskey Chamber of Commerce and with Emmett County's Housing Ready Program Director, that complete removal of the soil on the site would be outside of the financial capacity of this particular capital stack. So we don't want to say you can only approve this project if you do the highest possible standard, which, as you mentioned earlier, is not as good as doing some remediation. But I would like to posit that ensuring that the city maintains oversight and is keeping a close eye on it and has the ability to, if additional contamination is known, additional locations of contaminants are uncovered, that you can require changes to the site plan, or you can impose the requirements for additional testing that is not brought to you by the developer, but that you can say, this is a red flag for me. We as a planning commission would like to step in.
So your feeling is, I guess to me, it seems like that is not in my lane at all. However, you're saying that as a condition of approval, we could ask for more testing on other areas of that site.
I'll give that to you. So I believe that it is possible for and I'm going to let you correct me, to say, look, in a year after the developer purchases this property, we want to know the delineation of contaminants, and we want to have a robust plan, and we would like to review it. And then we're not held by an arbitrary deadline of, we need to get this done now for securing funding that is necessary to move this project forward. It is an arbitrary deadline that is created by outside forces that has nothing to do with the environmental condition of the site. And why not give yourself more time and give the developer and the consultants more time to make sure that we're all doing the right thing, and then make that decision then. And I do not know if that is within the planning commission's ability, purview. I do not know if that is something that you are comfortable imposing on this project. That is my recommendation, if possible, is to give yourself more time and don't be rushed into a decision where you're saying, this is a go, no go, and that's all we have.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so if you did more testing, if there was more testing, and it didn't reveal any worse contamination. Oh, yeah.
So if it doesn't reveal any worse contamination, but I feel like there's sort of two parts to this. So part one is for the site itself and the exacerbation of contamination and exposure to contamination on the site itself. And so that is sort of one column. And the other column is potential contamination that has sort of migrated into the river over the last 100 years and has no impact on the development of this site at all. So part one of this, where it's the site itself, if the additional testing is performed, and especially if testing is performed along the edge of the river, and it is not found to be any worse than baseline or any more alarming than is currently found, then I would kind of say, okay, let Eagle and the regular permitting process handle it. Let's just move forward. Again, Eagle staff are trained to handle these problems, and this is not my area of expertise. Regarding that sort of second category, I have already reached out to Eagle staff and to the Health Department of Northwest Michigan in order to sort of determine if there is a need for anything resembling a public health advisory, or if there is contamination in the soils of the Bear River. And so part of why it is useful for me as a water person to know if there's additional contamination or if contamination along that river is worse, is it can help inform what we are trying to accomplish in terms of making sure that, you know, all the things that aren't directly related to public health, but it's stuff like fish habitat, it is protected and maintained. So in terms of this project, if it's not going to be worse, then I say you can kind of give your blessing and move on, right? There are processes and procedures in place to specifically handle brownfield redevelopments. There are processes and procedures in place to handle changes to a site plan, and then you move on. But if you find out that something worse is there, or it's just in a different place than you expected, or it is in a place where it is going to have a large impact on the environment, then it still gives you the ability to ensure that protections are taken that meet the standards of Petoskey, not just state regulations.
Well, if it's worse than imagined, then it's already done damage. I mean, it's not it's not because of the development.
Right, correct. And so that's why if contamination is worse, I think that part of the role of a planning commission is to ensure that the site plan itself is responsive to the characteristics of the site and the characteristics of the area surrounding the site, right? You don't necessarily put an industrial site in the middle of a R2 residential area, just because it may not fit the context, even if it is an appropriate use of that particular slice of land. So part of what I'm saying is that I see it as relevant to your role to keep your hand in, if possible.
I had a question for John with you standing there. Is there any way you can think of creatively to work with the Watershed Council in terms of conditions or things we might do to move forward?
Commissioner, yeah, there are. I mean, I've worked on a couple of brownfield projects. Brownfield and non-brownfield projects that were adjacent to riparian areas. And people had the same concerns, even if they weren't a brownfield. What would be the level of development impact on the water? And the methodology that was used in all of those projects were that water samples were taken at strategic locations within the river, and they were so noted prior to any activity on the site in terms of demolition or grading. So you established a water quality baseline. And then over the period of construction, water samples were taken in those same locations in order to monitor if there was any additional contaminations or pollutants that were caused by the construction. And then some of the projects after completion, there was a series of other tests that were done after the projects were constructed to take a look at the water quality. Now, the Planning Commission can do that. And you can have those tests taken. And they can be, there's several companies here in the city and down in Traverse City that do water quality testing all the time, and it's not very expensive, but you want to set the protocols up before construction starts in order to establish that baseline. Now, regarding the comments made about the city imposing greater standards than Eagle, I would always advise you don't. Because the city doesn't have toxicologists, we don't have scientists on staff. We don't have people that really would understand or even be able to propose standards that are in excess of Eagle and EPA. Because many of Eagle's protocols relative to contamination and controlled in substances, Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, are also based on EPA standards and studies that they've done over a number of decades. So some of the benchmarks have already been established that you fall back on. And you could test, you could do additional testing, and I think MAC has indicated that they're going to do another round of tests. I'm sure if the planning commission asked for a couple other tests in the south part of the property where the wetlands are at, that they would comply with that. And then share that information. But relative to if water quality is a concern, then you can do a strategy of creating a baseline and then evaluating it during construction and after construction to see what the water quality, if it changed.
Of course, the point in the presentation was that not just to build it and then find out there's a problem, because the remediation can be, as in Bay Harbor's case, incredibly expensive and complicated.
It is, but
If it wasn't done right the first time.
the part of it is that we're missing is that we're not giving credit to the state agencies, the state agency that's going to monitor this. And I know there's a couple of representatives in the room that are from Eagle that probably can maybe provide some insight. But the brownfield projects that I've been involved in, the due care plan the due care plan is approved by Eagle. And it's got different techniques that the developer and the construction company and their agents have to follow as part of the project. And if things are uncovered during the construction that are outside of the due care, or things that weren't discovered, then Eagle is brought back in, and then there is additional attention paid to that issue. That's what would trigger any changes in the site plan. And depending on the severity of the change, it could either be a minor amendment or a major amendment, but that's already included in your PUD ordinance. But what that trigger would be. Okay, so if they were rearranging some buildings, changing a parking lot, those would be major amendments that needed to come back before the planning commission for evaluation. But I've been involved in brownfield projects, but I've always relied on the consultants, the scientists, and the Eagle representatives from that respective district on what their expertise is relative to how to resolve these contaminated sites. Now, one thing that Anna did mention, and I agree with, is that this project will make this site better off than it is today. There's no question about it. We're increasing the amount of impervious surface by the construction of the buildings and the parking lots. So we're capturing more of the rainfall and the snow melt, and we're diverting that into a closed treatable system before discharge. Today, when it rained today, that site's probably 30% lot coverage. So 70% of that site, the water was going to seep into the ground and go into the contamination. So by the virtue of building the parking lots and the buildings, we're actually covering more of the site and directing more of that water into a closed treatable system. But I will admit, we have to be careful about what's underground relative to groundwater, surface groundwater interface. And if there's going to be any vapor gases that require a vapor mitigation system. But Max said they're going to be doing another round of gas testing. That'll determine if they have to do vapor mitigation.
Well, potentially not understanding your use of the word closed system, because I see two pipes emptying into the river after going through a separator.
That's a closed system because that water that is running off of the parking lots is not going into a retention or a detention pond and infiltrating into the ground. It's going through a series of catch basins and pipes. It goes into the mechanical separators to get rid of oils and debris. And then it's discharged out into the river. That's a closed system. The water that's in the parking lot never seeps through the ground to get into further contamination.
So
Can I-
I'm sorry.
Real quick.
Oh, yeah.
So this comes back to, I think that you mentioned this, the 60% part of this, where approximately 60% of the lot is going to become impervious coverage. And precipitation that falls onto those impervious surfaces will be passed through the aquaswirl and then potentially through some sort of vegetative system and then discharged into the river. And so that particular fraction of the stormwater falling onto the site is within a closed system. Currently, there are portions of the site that water will infiltrate under the current site plan. And so if that explains the sort of discrepancy of closed system, that's the.
So going back to John with a real quick question, follow-up question. So in summary, are you saying that if additional testing was done in the southern portion of the site and along the river, as the tip of the mitt is recommending, which may already be planned, it may already be planned, but assuming that it gets done one way or the other, and the enhancement of water testing starting soon with a baseline protocol and continued water testing of the river, are you saying that the normal process would be that if anything significant was found, we'd have another crack at it?
Well, it gets to what Anna's issue is monitoring. And that would be part of the monitoring strategy.
But when you say monitoring, you outlined that under certain circumstances, it'd come back for site review, re-review.
Yeah, if something during construction.
So is there any need for any more monitoring other than the normal process that you outlined?
Not really, but I think if you want to have testing done by the wetland area in the south part of the site, which it hasn't been tested. I'm sure MAC they'll get a couple other borings done and provide that information to the planning commission relative to what they find.
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but the site plan review by this board is triggered by changes in the site plan, not necessarily by changes in environmental contaminants found, correct?
No, but if the environmental contaminants require a change in the site plan.
Under
then it comes-
Eagles standards.
Under Eagle standards, then it comes back here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I'd like to thank you. And we have Eagle representatives, so.
Can I just provide one clarification on the map, if I could?
Okay.
Thank you. Amanda mentioned that was the two locations there, and that was part of a supplemental investigation. All of the other points in the tables are groundwater samples. There in that location, and there's 16 total groundwater samples that were taken. I have maps. I don't want to kind of bog you down, but I've got maps of all the latest information and data that I could provide you, at the end of the meeting or not, if you wish. But none of the samples taken along the river indicated any constituents, any contamination. They were all non-detect. Let me just verify that. There were a couple of detections that were below Eagle standards for contamination. So there wasn't any of the migration of the soil contamination at this point that is reflected within the groundwater that would go into the GSI, which I think is an important point. There have been all of those samples taken, just in terms of clarity, in terms of the level of investigation that I mentioned before, is quite a bit above what normally happens.
And those were water samples?
Those are all groundwater samples.
That was my fault in misreading. Okay. There was a table.
So that was a supplemental investigation that had those two things, and so, but it's combined with that. So there's been quite a bit of investigation done, and it doesn't appear at this point in time that there's significant groundwater contamination. There's a couple of locations in the upper east side, I believe, if I have that, of Chromium, and then down in GP1 and kind of a southwest side, you can see the kind of bowl, maybe those were elements above Eagle criteria for groundwater. So the groundwater is not significantly impacted on the site. It's definitely concerning because it's shallow. We got to address all those issues. That's why we took the supplemental areas. But I just want to clarify that sampling right now doesn't show that the potential that screening levels of that contamination are migrating into groundwater and therefore into the soil. So I think we have quite a bit of data, but certainly.
Are you currently planning other borings in the southern area?
Yeah, and especially as what you mentioned, if it looks to be a discharge point, a potential discharge point, we have to ensure that there's no contamination there, so we're not adding to the hydraulic load to do that. So if that's one of the plans, we would certainly do that.
And I just want to, refresh the planning commission. We have three different consultants that are working on this. You have MAC that's representing the developers that's handling their due diligence. We've got Eagle. The city has a consultant from Fishbeck that's reviewing MAC's work and helping the city evaluate the brownfield plus the capital stack. And then in the middle, you've got Eagle that's reviewing all the information as well. So you have three different consultants, three different agencies that are involved in reviewing all of the testing information as part of this. And if you want to add the watershed council, that would be the fourth. So you got eyes on this site.
Okay,
I
thank
just
you.
want to provide that.
Yeah, all right, so the,
Another good clarification, because if that's the case, then I was looking at the supplemental and not this particular, then I'm correct. Half of my statements.
okay. So the Eagle representatives, would you like to come forward? Say your name and,
So hi, I'm Julie Lowe. I'm the Brownfield Grant and Loan Coordinator. I'm with the Remediation and Redevelopment Division out of Gaylord. And with me is Elaine Pelk. She is.
I work for the Remediation and Redevelopment Division. My role here is I'm on a technical support team that evaluates contaminated groundwater discharging to surface water. So I can provide you some insight into that once Julie's done.
And we also have Heidi Pixley. She's with Eagle, so she's our district enforcement coordinator. So whatever you guys have questions on, we're hoping to be able to answer them today.
Okay.
And I'll just be brief. I just wanted to say congratulations to the city of Petoskey. They were awarded a $1 million grant and loan, and Mac has already covered basically everything that I'm going to talk about. But I did want to just emphasize the work plan approval process. So we just got a signed contract from the city. It was about 2 weeks ago. So from this point forward is when we get a work plan from a developer's consultant, we review it. We actually have a whole team of reviewers at Eagle, so it's not just me. It'll also be our district enforcement coordinator. We also have a MISTA reviewer for this particular project because it involves MISTA funding. And so that's Jay Eichberger. He's an excellent vapor mitigation resource, and so he'll be part of that design review team and work plan review team. So we have a really good team that we use to review work plans. And basically how it works is it's submitted to us. We kind of go back and forth with the consultant. The work plan is submitted on behalf of the city. So the city has to approve the work plan before it comes to us. And we go, through a series of back and forth. For this particular project, I'm guessing that we're going to have a couple work plans. So what the grant and loan will cover is what we call eligible activities. So we're going to be paying for due care activities, and that's a broad statement. I get it. But it's basically removing contaminated soil from the property and then properly disposing it. We're also going to pay for sheeting and shoring and engineering controls for when that soil is getting dug out to protect the river, and also dewatering. So as they're removing soil, they may be dewatering contaminated water, and that's something we can pay for under the grant and loan to make sure it's properly disposed of, whether it goes to the treatment plant or it's treated on site and disposed through an NPDES permit. So those are just some of the things that the grant is going to pay for. And sequencing of the project, basically, what I anticipate is a work plan very quickly. We're going to have our first kickoff meeting with the city in a couple of weeks here. And then we will, work to approve work plans and get some of this work going so that we can prepare the site for development. So I will say there's a lot of challenges with properties like this. So we don't get a lot of big brownfield projects in northern Michigan. This is probably one of the biggest ones that we've seen. And as they mentioned, I've worked with Great Lakes Capital before on projects in Traverse City. They're a reputable developer, and I'm happy that they're taking this on, because otherwise, and Elaine can kind of speak to this, If we don't have a redevelopment or a brownfield program project, sometimes these properties just sit there and nobody does anything with them and there's a fence around it. So, so yeah, I'm here to answer questions about the brownfield grant and loan. And I asked Elaine to maybe talk about the GSI pathways. Thanks, Elaine.
So this section of the river in Petoskey has been hammered with industrial uses for over 100 years. So this is not surprising to see. We've not, since Maple Block was there for so long, we did not have data about Maple Block. We never got a report of a release. I know the phase 1 identified significant fuel storage to run their equipment. The contaminants out there, first of all, I'd like to say that we do have water quality standards in the state of Michigan. They are developed by toxicologists, both in the Water Resources Division for like the city of Petoskey's NIPDES permit at the wastewater treatment plant. You have to adhere to those standards when you're treating and discharging your effluent. And our division has toxicologists too that develop criteria for human health and in the environment. The concentrations in groundwater are below criteria for the most part. However, there's significant concentrations of contaminants in the soil. My recommendation was to remove the worst of the contaminants on site to protect that groundwater from going into the river. I don't think it's not necessary to put in collection lines that opens a whole host of other operation and maintenance issues and discharge permits. We base our decisions on data. While the first glance is good, we base our decisions on multiple monitoring. So that could be quarterly, it could be twice a year. And with respect to this property, if the developer doesn't want to follow through with that, then Eagle will follow through on that after the removal and after response actions. So once the building is gone, the most of the contaminated soil is gone, then we may come in and do some evaluation in the river ourselves. Okay. I'd like you to think about taking surface water samples because it very rarely correlates to what's in the groundwater to what's actually in the surface water with respect to the bear, because the bear is always flowing. So you're always collecting water samples that's coming from upstream. It's not going to tell you much. I've been doing this for over 30 years and we always base our decision on the groundwater going into the surface water. And you're really not going to see that happening by collecting surface water samples. We look below the sediments, collect our water samples, and then compare the criteria to what's ever in the groundwater to make our risk assessment decisions. The last thing I'll tell you is just because the contaminants are in the groundwater and discharging to the river at a certain level, it may not mean it may mean that it's not harming the river. As I said, the water quality standards are based on human health and the environment. So every body of water can take on some contamination without harming the designated uses. So it doesn't have to be non-detect. I could relate this to the Department of Public Works site. Whether you know or not, there was an underground storage tank there for many years. DPW had a release. They did response actions. I worked with Mike for a couple of years and your consultant. There's still groundwater contamination at DPW. It's a lot less. It is going towards the bear, but the criteria has been met there. So while some contamination is going into the river, it's not harming anything in the river. And they got a closure. So that site is more like this site versus Bay Harbor. So it's a little bit more comparison. It's a risk-based program. It's not clean it up to not detect. It's clean it up so it's not as bad as it was and it's not harming the surface water.
Thank you. So why don't you stay up so if we have questions. So so you're saying baseline water testing of surface water is not going to be useful.
I don't think it will.
Okay, but will you be doing water testing of the river along that site?
We're just talking about, when things are either, at some point during the process of redevelopment, we could use our resources, our in-house resources and collect groundwater beneath the sediments of the river. So we don't make our decision based on surface water
Right.
concentrations. We try to find the groundwater coming up, because the groundwater in this case is probably migrating into the river, it's coming up, and the sediments are out of the banks. Sometimes you see springs coming out of the banks of the river. So we would collect the groundwater below the sediments of the river and have that analyzed.
Okay, is that something that could be a condition that test happens or,
That's not their responsibility,
okay,
because we're looking at, that's not necessarily a public health. Due care obligation on their part.
Okay.
It's more of an evaluation of the conditions that Eagle would.
so what generates that type of test happening? What would have to? What would the parameters be for this should be tested, this doesn't need to be tested?
With respect to the site here.
The site of Bear River site.
So the soil concentrations are, in some areas, now you saw the Sanborn maps in the phase one, there were fuel storage areas, so we would concentrate on there, the area where the highest concentrations of soil is. And even after they take it out, we would concentrate on going adjacent to the river and into the stream sediments to collect groundwater samples to determine what the concentrations are. And then we would evaluate whether those concentrations are being harmful to the river or not.
Okay. So my question is, will that happen with this project?
Yes, we're in initial conversations, Julie, Heidi and I are talking.
Okay.
You can request that to us as a.
Well, that's what I would.
Yeah, tip of the mitt can request that of us. Yeah, I mean, basically you just put in a request and we use our geological services section to come up and evaluate properties. So I would like to go that route because the grant and the loan are completely maxed out in my program
Okay.
right now. We only allow $1 million for each
Sure.
bucket. And so
Right.
I don't want to say, oh, we're going to take some money out of the grant and do that because I want to, the grant is designed to meet their due care obligation and
Yes.
pay for
Okay.
due care obligations. So yeah, if requested, after the soil removal and after we do verification testing of the sampling spots that we take out, we can use our GSS to come up and do that evaluation. So.
And that's just a unit in our division that has equipment and personnel that come up here and help us collect samples. Heidi and I would actually develop a scope of work on where and what and how, and then they would come help us implement it.
Okay. Any other questions for Eagle? Ted?
Oh, just quick, how much, can you give some idea how much soil you think you're removing or?
I don't have an estimate yet, simply because I don't have a work plan yet. So because it's so early in the process, that is something that would come through a work plan. So I'm anticipating that the work plan that comes in on the contaminated soil removal will have estimated quantities because we have to review all of that. I don't know if Mac knows. the answer.
We kind of presumed some of those hotspot areas and drew something. At least the preliminary estimates were about 7,000 cubic yards of soil and which relates to about 10,000 tons.
So is that determination based on contamination or based on the amount of money there is to do the remediation?
In this case, it was based on the contamination because we're putting all of the money that we can into due care. That's our number one priority for the Brownfield grant loan.
Okay, Carolyn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I actually had a setback question. Is Eagle comfortable with the 30-foot setback from a proposed building to the assumed water's edge?
Oh, that's a part 303 call.
It's not our division.
But it is an Eagle question.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, but it's in our program. It's the 11th program.
If you want to email me, I could forward it on to them. So too bad they're not here tonight. I apologize for that.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I guess I will open it up to public comment at this point before we go into the review of everything. Does anybody wish to speak? Anyone online? No? Okay. Yes.
Ready to come to the podium?
Yes, and state your name and address.
Yeah, my name is Alex McKenzie. I'm a commercial broker representing Michigan Maple Block in this
Okay.
transaction. My office is located at 522 East Front Street, Traverse City. I just wanted to say that I, understand all of the concerns, expressed by Tip of the Mid. The reality is we put this contract or this property under contract last year in June of 2022. It's been under contract for a long time. I understand that a project like this relies on, financial incentives coming in. And I think the reality of the situation is if we aren't able to make this work with this developer, it may end up just remaining in industrial use. So I guess that's all I kind of really wanted to say was.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I bring it back to the commission for just any discussion. Okay, are we ready to go through the standards? I think maybe first, let's zip through the maps or the paperwork that they gave us, the enlarged paperwork. And if you have any comments on anything, bring it up now. Are there any comments about the C15 civil detail sanitary, civil detail storm? I think that they've covered pretty well and they're assuring us they're going to get the right size for things. Then we go to C2.0 existing conditions. Any questions or comments on that? The demolition plan, soil erosion sedimentation control plan. So on the soil erosion and sedimentation control plan, they make a note along the river that installs silt fence around the perimeter of the site. That's where the double filter fence will go. Okay. On the site and dimension plan, you have the signage shown. But that we won't be approving that sign tonight. That needs to go through the normal sign permitting process. And then the proposed fire hydrant is in the southeast corner of the building.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, at the building. I did clarify with Jason Fate on exactly where he wanted that. Jason Fate, the city engineer.
Okay.
Through DPW. Yep.
Well, I don't think that will impact tonight. Any questions from the planning commission on grading and storm plan? Utility plan. All right, landscaping plan. Rick.
Well, it's not on the landscaping plan per se, but it has to do with snow retention and storage. And I wondered, Charlie brought up the question about snow storage. There's a lot of parking lot and driveway that's going to require being plowed and snow stored somewhere. And I just wanted to express my concern about the impact of snow storage on plant materials in the landscape plan. And just wondered if, what comments you might have about that, or whether there's any potential issues with snow storage and the choice of plant materials that have been proposed to date.
Well, I think that the planner has asked that you designate an area of parking area that's not going to be used that can go for the storage, and therefore, as it melts down, it'll go through your filtering process. So on the landscape plan, I don't know how many people saw it because it's tiny print, but there were these little S's with a in a little fancy box. 3 of them are along the river, and I confirmed with our city planner that you would not be allowed to store anything there because it's too close to the river. So I think that concern maybe because it's going to be stored on pavement.
Well, but what excess pavement areas are there when the amount of parking basically is sufficient to meet the apartment requirements?
It doesn't appear that they're being stored on pavement. It looks like they're being stored on the landscape.
No, these were proposed areas. The planner talked to them about where it would go, and the request has been that it be on unused parking, find a parking area that's the least used and then set that aside as the snow storage. Did you have that conversation?
Yeah, John and I talked before at the meeting, yeah, and so we will take a look at that and definitely get a solution to that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess in consideration of the location, Rick is bringing up and Carolyn are concerned about that the plantings aren't harmed by the salt and everything that accumulates on the parking lot. And the weight, yeah.
Snow do a lot of damage to certain plants.
Right.
I used to plow snow. So if anybody's done it, know there's a secret to it. Primarily the road ends, okay, or the parking lot ends is where this is gonna go. You always have a turnaround tail at the end of the parking lot that leaves about 20 foot by 10 foot area. You'll probably, even in apartments in northern Michigan, we lose the snowbirds, okay? So those are monitored by the lease agents, and it can be 5%. Now, they don't give up the rent, okay? They keep their unit, but they go to Florida too, dwellers do. And most times, in this case, they don't allow subleases, okay? So basically at the road ends, as you see, if you were to drive to the end of those, and primarily it'll be towards the river, but again, this will be on the pavement, okay? And that's where that's gonna land, okay? And that's how we alleviate that. You're probably gonna lose 2 to 4 spaces on each side in the winter time. And it's a practical event that happens in northern Michigan, so.
Okay, so is that
So if I was to
reasonable?
leave the lectern.
Uh-huh.
Say, you're most likely, you're looking at these ends down here.
Okay.
And understand the grading plan's taking all this back at 2% into the catch basins. And then the same thing here. So you're still, 50 to 60 feet away from the river. But it's gonna be those spaces at those road ends where that kind of delineated in the final plan.
Okay, so when you create that, I would like that to be considered protected, that it does not trespass into the river.
Correct.
Yeah, that
It's all curbed, okay, so there's a border to that. It's not just the end of an asphalt, there's a curb that will be felt and contain that, so. I'm gonna tell you also, that's the best we can do on something like this. Snow is snow.
Mhm.
It gets blown, it gets moved, you get all these things. We do the best we can.
Right.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So,
Mhm.
And a question, but the 10 foot fire lane pathway, that'll be maintained through the winter, be cleared as well?
Yes. Primarily it's on those walks like that, we're not using salt and sand, okay, that would be like on parking lots, we don't use salt and sand on parking lots, okay, salt and sand goes on walkways, pedestrian walkways. So the bike trails don't get that treatment, okay, only, and even anymore. Because of market driven request with dogs and such, where you're not using as much salt and chemicals anymore. It's primarily sand. We learned from the Upers, we can do it. So it is pretty much just soap, but that area, parking lots and those kind of pathways do not get treated. They just get plowed. Okay.
thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
On the landscape plan, maybe for John, I believe I read that there was some discussion about the larger trees probably facing the road, on the road, that they needed to be 30 feet no more than 30 feet apart. And these are sugar maples and red maples, and I see some sugar maples right next to some white pines. Again, my perception, I looked it up today, that the width of a mature sugar maple is 30 to 50 feet.
I believe the landscape ordinance specifies 30 feet.
Does that apply in a PUD necessarily or not?
It doesn't necessarily have to apply to a PUD, but we would like to use city standards. So I mean, on the street trees, we could utilize the same standard that the DPW uses.
Yeah.
As part of their tree plan.
I think we have I'm just gonna comment, I think we have a problem in this city. These canopies intersect on mature trees, as do the root systems where they need water. And when you have to plant these things, the trees are starved for water, they're already surrounded by asphalt. And there's only a small area of, and so it all looks great when you put it in, and then they really struggle to survive. It doesn't make sense to me to intersect canopies of trees along the street. I don't get that.
That was in your ordinance, but I think one of the conditions was that the revise the landscaping plan based on Tim's review. And then we have submit the revised plan for administrative review and approval.
Okay.
So we can take a look at that tree spacing.
Like I see a white pine right next to a sugar maple, and again, it's all great when you put them in, everything's really pretty and small, and then it starts becoming this grown together mess.
Right. So noted.
So also I wanted to clarify that in our condition, it says to refer to Tim Newton's, so that means adding the plant sizes. And also any tree should be a minimum of, should be greater or equal to 5 feet from the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to specify that in the conditions.
No.
The fact that we said you referred to Tim's.
Yes.
That will be understood. Okay.
Will the phase 1 and phase 2 street trees be planted at the same time?
Phase 1, phase 2.
The site?
Along the right of way, I would say yes, but not internally to the commercial spaces.
Right,
We don't
right.
know what the size of that building is.
Right, okay.
Okay. Got that. All right. Anything else on landscape plan? All right, moving on to the building itself. We now know those colors. Some people didn't like the colors. It's now very neutral. Is there any discussion about the design standards for that?
I liked a lot better what I saw tonight on the graphic.
Yeah. Okay, are there, yes, Rick.
Just one quick architectural question. I notice on the entry stair kind of tower effects that those elements have a flat roof. And I just wondered if there was a functional reason or is it an aesthetic reason that you're proposing the flat roofs on the tower? Because I'm thinking of, on the back side of the tower where the sloping roof comes against it, it kind of creates a cricket problem in there. And, if you just like put the same roof slope on the towers and ran those right back into the main roof, you would eliminate that cricket situation. And I think the little bit of a slope would kind of pick up the character of the larger building. So I just wondered whether there was a reason to have those little flat roofs on the towers.
You must be a professor in architecture, because you can't have a line on a drawing if it doesn't have a reason, and because there's not a reason. So I think you were there. I'll say in this case, it's mostly aesthetic. We are trying to create a little modern vibe with this, a little urban flair with it. Those are the only flat elements on there. The contractors here, we have the same thing about creating these crickets. And having that kind of movement, which is kind of anti Michigan practicality stuff, but we are seeing it, we're seeing the practices, and we'd like to play off of it right now. But I will say it's to add an urban element to that. So, okay.
That's a fair answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can see that.
Because I didn't say.
All right, any other comments on that section of plans?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the photorealistic renderings that you put together for us. That really helped.
Yes. All right, and we're finally down to the photometric.
Before you go there,
Yeah.
just a quick question. Because I didn't really see it in here, and I'm assuming it's all in accordance with building code and so forth, but fire mitigation, I'm assuming each of these units is gonna have a full sprinkler system in it? And the division between the units, is that indicated by the darkest lines on the floor plan?
Have to look at it.
Which plan number are you looking at?
I'm just looking at a typical floor plan.
These quadrants are.
Okay, so it's the heavy lines that show the firewalls.
It's only, I think, a 1 hour wall. But it is a firewall.
Okay.
Well, it's only a 1 hour wall.
Only a 1 hour
It's
wall.
required by
Because it's suppressed.
Oh, because it's.
Yeah. Yeah, so many rules go away when it's suppressed. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anything on the photometric lighting?
Yeah, I have a question there also. When you look at that kind of 3D visualization of the photometrics.
So we're looking at sheet two.
Correct, sheet 2. I was wondering why there isn't a light maybe at each entrance rather than one in the center of each side of each building. It just struck me that maybe, especially with the longer buildings, that, you know, it would help at the center entrance, but there really wouldn't be light at the 2 end entrances. And so I wondered if really there shouldn't be some kind of light at each entrance.
Yeah, so we have the lights.
The red pack type lights.
Hi, Chris Wickline, JB Donaldson, 37610 Farmington Hills, Michigan. The lights are at the photometric shows kind of where some of the buildings have 2 entrances or 3 entrances, depending on the size of the building. And currently those are meant to light the parking lot. There would be, you know, other lights at people's patios and stuff like that, that would just be not part of that, but that's where they would get that light.
So the lights that are showing up on this image then are not at the entrances, or you're saying those are meant to try to throw light out to the parking areas?
Correct.
Those wall packs?
Yeah.
Well, would there also be lighting that doesn't show on this image that would be at each entrance?
Potentially, so you're gonna have a corridor with a glass door on it, and the entryways will be lit.
Oh,
And
yeah,
you'll
okay.
see through that glass door
I
into the
forgot about
entryways.
the interior lighting. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay.
So you're saying only at the entrances, it will be interior lighting that lights things up at the entrance?
Correct.
You're saying glass around the door,
Yeah.
to the side of it.
Yeah, like, so the door into the entryway wouldn't be a solid door. You'd be able to see into it.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. Thank
All
you.
right, so when we're looking at this. This is the development's lights.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's all you're gonna be, that's the maximum of lighting you're going to have on that property.
Correct. And that's really to meet the lighting pollution requirement.
Will it be hard for someone visiting to identify buildings? Like, do they have numbers or?
Yeah, so they'll be identified by addresses, and we'll meet all the fire department regulations.
Like at night, you'd be able to.
Correct. Yep. And we usually work with fire departments on, you know, how many sides of the building and what sides of the building and lighting and all that.
All right,
So, I'm sorry, just to clarify, this light rendering is showing light pollution essentially.
Correct.
So anything, even on the roof canopies, the awning, roof awnings, those could have downlights in them. At the
Correct.
entryways. Okay.
Yeah.
shouldn't that be included in the lighting plan?
The photometrics are usually done on the wall packs and on the parking lot lights,
Okay,
which they did parking lots, wall packs, walkways, and they did the dog park recreation area lighting. So they broke the lighting up into 3 or 4 different distinct zones.
okay. All right, well, hopefully. These downlighting that you're gonna do isn't gonna add to light pollution.
Correct. It is all downlight. They
Yeah.
don't allow us to protrude out into the parking areas.
Okay.
That is correct.
All right. Are we ready to start with the standards? All right, section 2E1. This is our standard review is section 1716. And I think we can all agree that the first item, legend, project title, that's been satisfied. Number 2 is the site data, site size, building heights. Is there anything? I believe it's been satisfied, but does anybody feel there's anything missing?
I just want to ask the question about that 30-foot setback from the approximate water's edge. Are we all comfortable with that? I'm not sure what the setback was before when it was zoned the I2. The
Okay.
water's edge, do we know? Or what it would be?
Existing building.
Yeah.
Oh, the setback from the river,
We don't.
we don't regulate that. We don't have, there's nothing in the ordinance that says, some of the ordinances will say 25 or 50 feet from the top of the bank, but there's nothing here.
Would it be like a backyard setback?
Yeah, look, it's like a rear yard, so I mean, it's there's only a couple locations where it gets fairly close, but they pulled some of the buildings back a little bit in order to put that 10-foot pathway back there for the fire department. So,
So what is our rear setback in an I2 then?
pardon me?
What is the rear setback for an I2, or is there no rear setback?
So, Lisa, look at that.
While she's looking, maybe going forward as we review the zoning ordinance, we might want to consult with Tip of the Mid and see if there is a minimum setback we should require on water.
We have been recommending a 50-foot vegetated buffer along all
Okay.
water features. I understand that may not be possible on this site, but that is our current recommendation.
Okay, thank you. But like I said, going forward, that might be something we want to address in the zoning ordinance.
Looks like I1 is 40 feet and I2 60. It's the same.
For setback, rear yard setback. Carolyn is showing concern for this. Because of the site, I don't know that they could readjust it to change that setback the way the site is now.
Yeah, I agree. I just want everyone to be aware of it. I mean, 30 feet isn't very much.
No, it
About
isn't.
Well, the one thing it sort of mitigates is it's not a wall, the whole length of a building or the end of the building. It's that close. It's the corner of the building. So that helps mitigate the impact, I would say.
Mhm. So Carolyn, does that help address that issue?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the site plan where they're showing their approximate 1% annual floodplain line, you know, in that spot where it pinches down and it's the corner of the building. You know, that high floodplain line is halfway between the approximate water's edge and that building. It's about 15 feet. The slope goes up, you know, it's really steep in that portion, but when you build where they're over digging and, you know, getting close to that slope edge, and
right,
I'm just throwing it out there as a concern.
John, is there a way of addressing that?
Not without making a modification of the site when we move the building. It's that one corner is a tight site.
Mm-hmm.
Made some adjustments in order to put the the fire lane back. We made some adjustments in order to put the fire lane back there, recognizing that it was pretty close to the corner of that one building. But the rest of the buildings are fairly set back. Except for building F is fairly close and a little bit of the corner of building D. But the other buildings are set back their distance amount from the top of the river, top of the bank. The only, like, for example, building F, there's possibly some room to move it a little bit to the east. Building D, possibly moving it a little bit to the north to reduce the corner distance. But we don't have much, there's not much room on the site to make significant adjustments. You see what I'm talking about, Wayne?
So to the developer, does that concern you about the floodplain area? Do you feel that should be addressed?
We're not impacting the floodplain area, the little part that comes in, and that wasn't identified as a wetland in that area. When we had a pre-application meeting, it was, we noted that area, and you can see the depression when you're out there, and it's basically an elevation-based thing. But no, I mean, it's what we've held to since day one is that fence line. If you're familiar with the property, there's a fence that goes along the river, and you're not crossing that fence. That's our east or westmost boundary that our grading limits are. And so, the area that we're developing is the current used area. So no, and it's going to the Eagle permitting, not the Brownfield, the other group, and we'll be addressing any concerns they have along the way, certainly. But from the site visit, they didn't see a lot of concern.
Erosion, I mean, there's a multitude of concern.
Yeah.
That you can bring. I have the Borden River that runs through the township, my township, where I've been supervisor for 30 years. So I'm used to the Natural Rivers Act, all these setbacks and these concerns. So they come, we have rainwater coming off the roof, but we'll have gutters, okay, on that. Because it's coming from 3 stories up. So we don't even want rainwater to hit people at that velocity. We have the structural strength of the buildings. These are basically a slab on grade, correct? So we're not going down with crawl spaces and deep footings, okay, like you would think in a house or building. So when you talk about over excavating, it actually isn't as much as you think, because that is sitting right there at grade. So the walkway, i.e. the fire trail, actually creates a much more stable element than if it was natural vegetation there. And like trails going through a sensitive landscape, it's better to have a hard surface going over tree roots than having soil that compacts, okay, and beats that down again. So actually having that hard surface right on that corner is good. So we're not worried about erosion. That's actually better there than in most cases. And again, we've used that existing natural barrier. It's not always the prettiest one, I'll tell you. It's a lot of different vegetation as our border. So we don't plan to disturb that. Floodplain wise, when the floodplain comes up, we're about, you're right, it comes up about halfway the height, okay? You have your floodplain and then your floodway, which has more historical context to it. The floodway is where your erosion can happen. Floodplain is actually 4 feet higher. If most of these rivers that have control devices on them, if we saw a 4 foot higher river, we've got a lot of problems. But so it's a number basically that Eagle gives us above that level. It's not like it's not historic like it is on a lake. Okay. It deals with what's called the HECRAS study that goes way up where the river starts and all that flow on it, all the hard surface and that whole watershed comes down. And that's just rare to see. So
Okay. Well, I guess my biggest question is where does the proposed 30 foot setback come from? If we're not driving that question, then who, or we're not setting that standard, then who is?
There,
Is it the
no,
developer
this is
creating
this is a PUD, so
Right.
there is no definable standard, so
Right.
that it was based on this, on the site
Right.
design.
Right.
it? I mean, I just think it's an arbitrary number and the tip of the mitt says 50-foot green land or green buffer. And, they're doing 30 and then they're doing a 10-foot fire lane, so really it's only a 20-foot green buffer for the water. I mean, if the rest of the commission feels like the 30 is, sufficient.
Having dealt along the
that.
Bourbon River in Traverse City, where Great Lakes Capital has built, we've had this discussion, because we have the same sense about our Bourbon River. There's a difference between being someone in a rural area like I am, where the natural rivers exist. And we have 150-foot setback, okay? Bear River may have that farther upstream where things are much more undeveloped. Then there isn't an urban experience with a river. If you impose a 50-foot setback along your Bear River in the downtown of Petoskey, you're gonna run into a lot of issues, I'm gonna say, with property rights, existing development and these kind of things. So it's what happens, the intensity, if what you're concerned about, and that's what I was gonna treat, if you're worried about erosion, there's ways to take care of that. If you're worried about the river experience of the corridor, that's another thing. If you're worried about stormwater filtering, that's another thing. So if you can take care of almost everything by treating it differently. So if there is a concern, I would say be cautious in an urban environment trying to do a 50-foot river setback. You're gonna just run into a lot of conflicts. 2025 is generally in our city. If we can get that, we're happy. So, but so if there is an issue, we can work it out by animals anyway. But just do it as probably it's gonna happen.
Well, to me, it's not an issue. I think because again, like I said a minute ago, it's just the corner of the building that is that close and not the whole length of the building. It would be that close. And in order to maintain the density of the overall site and maximize the number of apartments that we're gaining for the community, I think it's, to me, it works fine.
I guess my biggest concern would be the flood risk. That can damage property, although as he said, they're not going underground. All right, so anything else on number 2? Moving on to number 3. See, the freestanding directional sign shall be labeled with setback height and relative location. Yeah, so that's for the signage that goes through the sign committee. All right, on hydrants that we're they're asking for an additional one, and we have that in our conditions. Ingress and egress for the site. It appears to be satisfied. Does anybody have a different take? All right, we're gonna move on to landscaping. And I believe that's satisfied. Lighting fixtures, we're just asking them to change the color from white to black. Other than that, the photo standards appear to be correct. I don't think there's any loading zones or truck docks. So, okay, so the maintenance building is located in the inner corner. And we do have a request that they put in a
Heavy duty concrete.
yeah. All right, so parking lot says partially satisfied. Oh, the proposed no snow storage, so and we have a condition for that. Principal and accessory buildings structure shall be shown. That is satisfied. Sidewalks will be shown. They're showing the 10-foot wide pathway on Stanish Avenue, so. That's satisfied. Site location surrounding shall be shown by illustrating all buildings within 100 feet. They didn't exactly do that, but they showed pictures, aerial pictures with that. Okay, and then we're looking at soil erosion control plan. That appears to be satisfied. Stormwater drainage shall be shown on site and adjacent streets. We have. That's saying it's partially satisfied. And there, I think we have a condition that the Eagle stuff be addressed. All right, topography, that appears to be satisfied. Trash dumpsters satisfied. Utilities existing, satisfied. Okay, building and accessory structures. We've discussed on-site circulation. Proximity buildings, they're all pretty far away. So that's satisfied unless anybody has any concerns. Then we go on to ingress and egress, curb cut locations, but those all seem to be, doable. We have discussed in the past the number of curb cuts. And I think it's settled on what they proposed. Page 7. All right. So where corner parcel fronts on the state highway, well, we don't need anyway. It appears that everything's satisfied. Landscaping, screening, buffering. They do note that the riparian edge along the Bear River will be preserved and not disrupted as part of the project. And also we have a condition for them to refer to the landscape review performed by Tim Knutson for corrections on that. And then the lighting is satisfied. So natural and historic features, they're recommending a double filter fence to protect the Bear River. Parking, we are requesting a removing of 6 parking spaces. Everyone's in agreement with that. And then sidewalks, they have improved things to be larger. Signage will be later. And then the stormwater drainage, we had a lot of discussion about that. So we need to, it's again mentioning the seasonal snow storage areas need to be add an additional level of debris filtration. Does that have to do with the double filter on the river's edge? All right, satisfied. So we have gone through 1706 standards for review. Is there any more discussion? Would someone like to, Carol?
Are we gonna require additional surface groundwater testing on any parts of the site, or are we?
Okay, well, if we want to talk about the, before we make the motion, some of the conditions. I think we probably, I know it's been said many times that the sign approval will happen at a later date. But I think it's good to not, to have that in the conditions, so it's very clear. I would say the baseline water testing, based on what Eagle had to report, that the surface water doesn't really give enough information, and that they are willing to do the sediment testing, that's probably what we want. And so I think we should put that in as a condition. Well, no, we can put a condition that the city requests that from Eagle to do that sediment water testing. Oh, you're right. These are conditions for the developer.
Right.
So how do we get the message to the city that we would like that done?
City managers.
No, I looked at.
The request can also be noted in the minutes.
Yes, okay, very good. All right. And then do we want to include requesting testing in the south area? Should there?
It was going to be done already, so.
Okay. All right. Everybody's good with that? All right. I think when we do the conditions, we might want to, did everybody get this? Yeah, we did. There's conditions with a couple of new conditions and then adding really just sign approval. So would somebody like to entertain a motion?
I'll take a crack at it.
Okay.
Based on the documentation submitted by the applicant, the public record, and the recognition that the subject property is identified as a priority redevelopment site in livable Petoskey master plan. Make a motion to recommend approval of the PUD site plan case number 1-23 for property located at 1420 Standish Avenue. Property identification number 52-19-07-200-012. To pursuant to section 1716 site plan review of the city of Petoskey zoning ordinance with the following conditions. Add a fire hydrant. Number 1, add a fire hydrant on the southeast corner of the proposed commercial lot. Number 2, revise the light fixtures, poles, brackets, luminaries, and wall packs to black. Number 3, address issues noted in Eagle's July 28, 2023 letter. Number 4, revise the landscaping plan as noted in the review memo dated August 29th, 2023 from Tim Knutson, RLA. Submit revised plan for administrative review and approval. Number 5, install a double filter fabric fence adjacent to the Bear River, Eagle S51. Number 6, remove 6 parking spaces that are adjacent to the 2 curb cuts. Number 7, installation during and after construction of catch basin filters, Eagle S58. Number 8, identify snow storage areas on sheet C 4.0. The site and dimension plan sheet, and locate snow storage areas where snow melt has access to the closed stormwater system. Number 9, installation of heavy-duty concrete pads in front of the water-related dumpsters and compactors. Number 10, prior to issuance of a zoning permit, submit easement documents for review and approval from the city for the 10-foot easement along Standish Avenue for the 10-foot wide shared path and the area designated for pedestrian bridge connection to Riverside Park. Number 11, remove the existing city walk along Standish Avenue. And number 12, submit to the city prior to the second reading of the PUD rezoning material and color boards for the apartment buildings for administrative review and approval. Now, I want to go back to number 10 just for a quick second. Is it Riverside Park or is it River Bend Park?
River Bend.
Sorry, River Bend.
Thank you. That's my motion.
I have a question. Since they submitted the materials and color boards, does the city need to review it? Do we need number 12?
No, we don't need number 12 since
Okay.
they submitted it.
Because it's been submitted.
Please modify my motion to eliminate number 12.
Okay,
You did want sign approval at a later date.
right. If everyone's okay with that. And Lisa, what we've used language in the past about the sign approval having to come later. Do you remember what that language is?
Subject to staff review and approval typically is what.
Well, I think on this one, because it looks like it's pretty large,
Mhm.
that it probably should be taken up by the sign committee.
It's really it's a function of the zoning administrator.
Okay,
They have to meet the ordinance unless they,
well, it's a PUD though.
well, but I think what we were looking at is the sign for the RM1 district
Well,
requirement,
what
or for the apartments, it says.
for apartments,
Yeah.
so historically PUDs. The signage that has been used, or the district has been used to regulate it is the B3.
Okay,
That I've seen any notations on, unfortunately, that was actually on the commercial section of it. I did discover this afternoon. That. Freestanding signs identifying a multifamily residential complex or subdivision in any district should be restricted to a maximum area of 12 square feet and a maximum height of 6 feet. So if they wanted to appeal that, I'd have to review the standards for appealing to the sign committee, so they could potentially appeal at that point if they wanted something larger.
okay. Then we probably don't need that in the,
No, I
So-
think that's why it typically goes.
so we'll stop at 11.
Well, wouldn't you have, I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand it, wouldn't you have some, right now, the PUD has no rules for size,
Mhm.
so shouldn't there be some suggestion of what we're gonna accept? What districts?
The apartment, the actual use is what dictates the size of the sign,
Not the zoning.
not the zoning for apartment complexes.
Okay,
So. That is less than what. The B3 that's been used has been for the commercial portion of the PUDs, which in most of our PUDs, that's the primary. Component is the commercial.
so if
aspect.
there's commercial later, that would be another sign.
Correct. Yeah,
But it seems like they're proposing 2 signs for the apartments. Yeah, and I think in our zoning, it's 1 sign,
2 freestanding,
that's what they're proposing,
there's 1 freestanding. So we're gonna-
Unless they appeal it.
unless they appeal.
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Okay.
Want me to read it again?
No, I didn't catch that. All right, so we have a motion on the table, is there a second?
I'll say Charlie's motion with the conditions included.
Okay. Roll call vote?
Just to clarify.
Okay.
are you Adding sign approval?
No.
That's, yeah, okay. Braddock?
Yes.
Buck?
Yes.
Detmer? Yes. McSweeney?
Yes.
Meridian?
Yes.
Newman?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Robson?
Yes.
Wilmot?
Yes.
All right. Congratulations. Thank you for your time. All right, now we're moving on to public comment about things that have not been on the agenda. If anybody would like to make public comment.
Yeah, long drive.
And now we move on to commissioner comments.
Oh, okay.
Are there any
Okay,
commissioner
thank you so much.
comments?
I was just wondering if the city could reach out to the Health Department of Northwest Michigan and have them do surface samples at our bridges along the Bear River. Sorry, what was that? I'm wondering if the city could reach out to the Health Department of Northwest Michigan to have them do water samples along the Bear River at our bridges, like they do at the beaches and, you know, at the waterfront, just to set a data so we can monitor water that's coming down the river.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, there, you know, the comment on water quality, a couple of projects I've been involved in. They did the QSI or the GSI, the groundwater surface interface, like Elaine mentioned from Eagle, to determine if contamination was leaking underneath. Those were on non-brownfield sites, so the state wasn't involved in it. But in a couple other communities that had cold water fisheries, okay, rivers, they did water quality samples to determine DOD and turbidity to see if the construction site was causing any type of effluent into the into the river that would affect spawning or fish habitat. Or macroinvertebrate damage, which is what fish eat off of. So, yeah, I think your comments are appropriate, that we should take a look at that.
But I'm sorry, you're talking about more of just a general baseline state of the river.
Yeah, exactly, because I mean, people walk the Bear River, their dogs go in it, little kids get in it and play, like it just when they close down a beach because of a water test. I think we should have that along the Bear River as well.
Yeah. And the water tests aren't all that expensive.
I do have a question though.
So she made the comment, I forget what her name was from Eagle, that in a river like that, moving that quickly, that it's not, you don't actually find much out because it's ever changing.
Well, that's with the contaminants.
Okay.
But issues like turbidity, that's like dust and dirt that's getting in during construction. That has a tendency to settle.
Okay.
And then it affects your stream bed, which affects your fish habitat.
Okay.
So, in a standard water quality test, they'll take a look at turbidity, BOD, biological oxygen demand, and some of those characteristics that affect water quality. If you're gonna, E. coli is another one, especially with the warm weather. So those are all standard parameters for a water quality baseline. I agree. Regardless if there's development along the river, I think the city should establish a water quality baseline that's monitored periodically to see what's going on.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any other comments?
I would be remiss not to ask about the sign committee recent meeting, number one.
Comments, but.
And then number two, to ask the status of the short-term rental with the council.
Oh,
Haven't met. We haven't discussed it. So we're gonna take the full year.
well, I think you're trying to set up a special meeting. You weren't able to do that in September.
We were planning on doing it one day, and then this project had some priority to it, so we shuffled that discussion further back, so.
Ted? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Quick question for maybe for Lisa, what came of the discussion with the fence at the urgent care basement?
I just received a fence permit application for a replacement fence that is solid vinyl. I have not had a chance to review it to make sure that it encompasses the entire playground area. That's my focus.
Okay.
But hopefully sooner rather than later, that will be rectified. The bike rack has been removed out of a parking space that's been there for some time. I'm not sure where that replacement is going to go exactly. We'll have to figure that one out, but one thing at a time.
Okay, Carolyn?
Is Lumber Lofts still moving forward on schedule?
As far as I know, I had a voicemail from Andrew and I called him back, but I've not heard back from him. So I don't know if just with the holiday weekend if things we just didn't connect, but it sounds like they're preparing to submit an application for zoning permit as well as a building permit application with the county. So.
Okay, updates?
Lisa and I have had some discussion with the owner of the former Nagoya restaurant on a couple possible projects that they're looking at. And then we also have a meeting coming up on Friday, the 15th, with an architect out of Grand Rapids that wants to talk to us about some potential project for the former Rite Aid building. So there is some discussion going on with some additional projects.
Okay.
The sign committee met on Tuesday. We met on Tuesday. Seems like it's just a series of Mondays this week.
Yeah.
We met on Tuesday, established a format, and we have a meeting the last part of September to take a look at a draft for the sign ordinance that Lisa is working with Christine on in the planning office. And you will get in your packet in September the proposed rental inspection ordinance, but we're not asking the planning commission to do any commenting on it. It's primarily for information only, and the committee is going to cycle that directly to the city council for their deliberation. I will share with you some information that I shared with the rental inspection committee on housing quality and on rental properties at the September meeting. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay. Well, I think this meeting's gone on long enough, so we are adjourned. Oh, that's right. I forgot to bring an envelope. Oh, Lisa